and welcome on this breakout session on safer spaces for LGBTQI plus people with a migrant background. So the title of this session is LGBTQI plus and with a migrant background, how attainable are safer spaces. I'm going to talk about the Equal City Project. My name is Aida Yancy and I work at the Rainbow House, Brussels in Belgium. Maybe just a little bit about me. So my name is Aida Yancy, as I just said. My pronouns are she and her. And I am a project manager on the Equality Toolbox for LGBTQI plus people with a migrant background. Yes, I work at the Rainbow House Brussels in Belgium. I'm an historian, I'm an activist, and I'm specializing on issues of gender, race, and sexualities. So what is the Rainbow House? So the Rainbow House is the Federation of French and Dutch-speaking LGBTQI plus associations in Brussels, Belgium. It is also a literal house, brick and mortar, with a bar. It's a collaborative bar led by member organizations. As a federation of associations, we have around 70 associations that are members of the Rainbow House that treat from everything to specific LGBTQI plus rights, like trans rights, or lesbian associations, gay bears, and things like this, as well as organizations that are more adjacent to LGBTQI plus fights by being related to human rights struggles. So we are also a team working on various social cultural projects. We have some festivals, some music festivals. We also have some more social projects, such as, for example, a project to support asylum seekers in their request and to prepare them, yes, for their interviews. We also a key partner for political dialogue on LGBTQI plus rights. So the Equal City Project, what is it? So the Equal City Project is a project that is funded by the European Commission. It is coordinated by IOM Luxembourg and Belgium here in Brussels. It is a project that led to the creation of 4 toolboxes to support local authorities in fostering inclusion and protection of migrants who are at risk, who survive sexual and gender-based violence by building the capacity of urban frontline services. So these 4 toolboxes, the first one is the one I'm going to talk about today. It's setting up and managing safer spaces for LGBTQI plus people with a migrant background. The second one focuses on providing assistance to migrant women and girls at risk or who are survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. The third one is focusing on increasing the well-being of unaccompanied migrant children and their frontline workers, and it's led by Rome. And the fourth one is led by Gothenburg in Sweden, and is focusing on tackling honor-based violence in migrant families through intercultural and value-based dialogue. So the toolbox I'm talking about today is the one, of course, focusing on LGBTQI plus rights. The aim of the toolbox is to support frontline services to better welcome LGBTQI plus people with a migrant background by making their space safer. And the target group, so this, the primary target group, the people who are to use this toolbox are actually the frontline workers. So they may be working on subjects related to sexual and gender-based violence. They may be in the health sector, they may be in the police forces, they may be in social services, they may be city services, local administrations, housing, schools. It's very wide. Of course, in all of this, we also have LGBTQI plus organizations. The secondary target group, the who we are making the spaces safe for, are the LGBTQI plus people with a migrant background, which is taken very widely. So because by migrant background, we hear people who are actually migrants, so people who are moving from point A to point B, but also people who may be asylum seekers, they may be refugees, they may be members of diasporas, basically everyone who is perceived as being from a migrant background. So to go back to the main question of this session is how attainable are safer spaces for LGBTQI plus people with a migrant background? First, again, as I just said, when I'm saying LGBTQI plus people with a migrant background, it's really to be taken widely. We know that people who are perceived as being from a migrant background can be migrant, they can be refugees, they can be asylum seekers, they can also be BIPOC, they can be wearing specific religious signs that makes them look like they might not be from here. So it's a very wide group, and we are taking all of this into consideration. So the first thing I want to address in how attainable safer spaces are is actually the problem with safer spaces, because the notion of a safer space is kind of a buzzword, right? The safe space, we like to stick it, I call it the sticker syndrome, because it's a bit of a, okay, let's declare we are safe, we are putting a sticker on the door, look, we are a safe space. But does that actually guarantee that a space is actually safe, especially for multi-marginalized people, even inside of the LGBTQI plus community? And also the other problem with it, and with this fame behind the idea, is the empty promises, because a lot of us have heard that a space was supposedly safe until we get burned when getting in those spaces. The second main problem is who decides what is safe. In Europe, in general, most of the organizations, including LGBTQI plus organizations, are majority-led organizations. So they are usually not led by people who are both LGBTQI plus and from migrant communities. And we also have a real problem in our society in general, in Europe especially, to have a very Eurocentric view on what is LGBTQI plus, what the community needs, what the community wants. I'm thinking, for example, of all of the narrative around the coming out and the necessity of a coming out that is actually very detrimental when working with people who may not have this as a priority in their lives. And then the third aspect I really want to see that can be problematic with safer spaces is what space. Because then we tend to think that space to be safe is kind of an activist space, which makes sense. I mean, the smaller the group, the easier it is to keep a space as safe as possible. But what about essential services? And this is the question we ask with this toolbox is, what if you need to go to the hospital and you don't feel safe enough to go? That's actually an essential service. So how can we translate this safer space idea that we tend to have in activist circle to more mainstream but yet essential services in cities? So maybe just to clarify, what is our vision of a safer space? So we have chosen to work on safer spaces as the concept and the tool drawing from Black feminist theory and praxis. And as such, of course, safer spaces are a tool for social justice and deconstructing power imbalances, including the imbalance between those who are perceived as helpers and those who are perceived as needing help. So it's really crucial in this aspect to try and leave behind othering discourses, like just the idea for mainstream services in cities to see LGBTQI plus people. Also, it's already an other group. They are the other. And then we have people who are migrant or from migrant backgrounds are also seen as other. And that comes with a power dynamic, right? Because if you keep saying that there is the one group, the majority-led group, and then others, you're putting actually a hierarchy there. So here the focus in this toolbox is really, and I'm going to get back to it, but it's really to focus on self-accountability, collective responsibility, and introspection to make space for multi-marginalized people to express what their needs actually are rather than what we imagine their needs might be. So the definition I put into this toolbox of what is a safe space. A safer space is any kind of spaces perceived by an individual as welcoming and accepting of their identity and in which they can share information about themselves without fear of negative repercussion. It must foster a climate challenging social norms and prejudice, even if it's in the form of microaggression. And it's a climate that makes people feel truly respected and physically, psychologically, emotionally secure enough to take risks, express and explore their views, identities, attitudes, and behaviors. So that's a very long definition. I may let it sit in for a second because it's pretty big, but basically really a space where anyone can come in as they are and feel accepted. I'll get back to it. So, the Equal City LGBTQI plus toolbox aims to transfer these activist notions that are very important, they are at the heart of our struggle, to frontline services focusing on sexual and gender-based violence, because that's actually a very big subject. And of course, when we talk about sexual and gender-based violence, any violence against LGBTQI plus people, specifically targeting LGBTQI plus people, is considered as sexual and gender-based violence, right? So why, in this case, why did we focus on safer spaces in the context of this European toolbox, right? Well, the first thing is that we know that the majority of sexual and gender-based violence cases in migrant communities, as we say, remains unreported and unaddressed. And one of the reasons that we identified for this is just that people don't feel comfortable or may be scared of going to certain places for fear of being stigmatized or having having their community stigmatized or being stigmatized in front of their community. Like, it's a very big thing. So that setting up safer spaces is an efficient way to facilitate access to urban services for LGBTQI plus people from migrant communities and encourage them to speak out without fear of repercussion and stigmatization by making them feel seen, heard, and respected. It's a good way to empower people to seek help and trust professionals. I mean, it's really important to maintain the idea that safer spaces are really an access issue, because spaces that are not perceived as being safe are spaces that are naturally avoided. And thus, I mean, if they are avoided, they are inaccessible. So the perception of a space is of equal importance as reputation, right? Is often the only educator one has. So better practices when welcoming service users can make the difference between people walking through the door or avoiding a service completely, sometimes with high risk. And we all have heard of horror stories of people who have been so mistreated by doctors, for example, that they just avoid them and may end up with huge infection because they got a cut on their leg with a razor or something, but just didn't feel safe enough to go and check it out. It can be very, it can have very dire consequences on a very long term. So how does the toolbox work? Well, the main idea in this toolbox is really in the definition of safer spaces. And it rests on 3 pillars and then on 3 key principles. The 3 safe space pillars, it's hard to say, safe space pillar. You'll realize that I wrote most of the time safer space. That's because we are realizing that it's impossible to guarantee that spaces are 100% safe at every single moment in time. But the 3 main pillars of a safer space is a feeling of belonging for the people who get there. They must feel like this space is actually also conceived with them in mind. It's a notion of empowerment, making sure that people actually can make choices about their own lives and actually know what's going on with them and that decisions are not taken for them. And the last one is, of course, unconditional respect with every single aspect of their identity. I like to shorten the idea with just this simple sentence is I hear you, I see you, I respect you. And not, I don't want to see this part, I'm going to respect you, but really like it's a full I see you, I hear you, I respect you. And the three key principles for the people who are actually putting these spaces in place is not a magic recipe. We would love to have a magic potion that can just make people be safe, because what makes a difference really, a safe space is not really a place. What makes a space that's more or less safe will depend on who is in it and how they interact, right? So the first point for people who are holding these spaces is introspection. People need to observe and question their own behavior and attitudes continuously. The second one is going hand in hand with it is self-accountability. And it just goes around the idea that everyone is responsible for their own choices and actions as well as their consequences. And it really demands a commitment to stay aware of one's blind spots and to challenge one's own habits and positioning. And the last one is shared responsibility. There isn't one specific person in charge of a safer spaces. That's the issue we have, for example, with the idea of having focal points. We like to put focal points in organization, but the problem is that you cannot have just one person who knows what a safe space is and tries to maintain spaces that are more or less safe on their own. It's not possible because every interaction is taking part in this bigger idea of a safer space. So everyone is to hold themselves accountable for maintaining it individually and collectively. This notion also of introspection, of self-accountability, it's really, and of shared responsibility, it's really, really important. And we realize it's something that tends not to be used too much. For example, there is something going around like this. I'm asked a lot for trainings about, for example, interculturality. And what I'm asked when I'm asked to do a training on interculturality is giving a manual to people on how certain people, depending on where they come from, act. And so how can we come into contact with people who act in a certain way because of their culture? But of course, big scoop, we are all individuals. We are all informed by our own culture, actually by our own cultures often. And we cannot be we are not predictable. We are not robots. We are actually human, right? So here the focus is less on how is the person walking through the door going to act or expect me to act, and more on what is my attitude, what is my behavior to make sure that I'm as welcoming and as open as possible to make this person feel comfortable and at home wherever I am working, right? When we talk about frontline workers, in the toolbox, for example, I use the word collaborators a lot because I do realize especially in LGBTQI plus organizations, right? A lot of people are not necessarily workers. They may be volunteers. They are working, but they may not be seen as being in the task force or whatever. So I'm using the word collaborators very loosely for everyone who is actually participating from the organization side. And then we have users, who are the people who come in and who may use the service for a reason or another. Another focus in the toolbox is very important. It's reminding people that LGBTQI plus people with a migrant background may be the users of your services. They may also be your colleagues and your collaborators. And if they are your collaborators, they need to feel safe at work too. So that was my parenthesis. I'm moving on. So what is in this toolbox? So the toolbox contains 3 main tools, 4 tools, 2 introductions, right? The first tool is a set of guidelines for frontline services management. It's focusing on setting up safer spaces, and it also focuses on how to make your own workplace safer for LGBTQI plus people from migrant backgrounds that may be your colleagues, and by extension for other people who may not be both LGBTQI plus or from a migrant background, just making your workplace safer in general. The second one is a manual for frontline workers, and it's really specific about managing safer spaces. It will refocus on interactions. Then we have a training manual that's meant for trainers, but and I'm going to get back to it, but could also be used by people who are interested in the toolbox but need a refresher course on certain aspects before jumping in. Then there is some awareness raising material. We created some videos. I'm going to show you some drafts of the videos later on, and a flyer. And then we have a general introduction about how we got to this toolbox, thinking, for example, also of the method. This toolbox is focusing on an intersectional approach. I'm going to manage it. And there's also a guide for cities and local authorities, because the way this project was built, it's called Equal City. The way the project was built, it was first to reach out to cities, so cities are going to be able to share the toolbox. So this is my slide on distribution. So you have cities who receive the toolbox through IOM, or check on IOM and find the toolbox, and then they would give it to other frontline organizations, right? But also to some LGBTQI plus organization. But we know that in certain contexts, cities may not be able, also in certain political contexts, may not be willing to do that work. And so we are also reaching out to LGBTQI plus organization, because we also know that usually when cities change their policies around LGBTQI plus people and people from migrant backgrounds and people who are both together, usually it's from the civil society that it comes. We have organizations lobbying municipalities and towns and things to actually change how they view things. So from the LGBTQI plus organization, it may spread to other frontline organizations, such as hospital, the police, but also, again, I was thinking of schools. In Belgium, we have this system where there are psychologists in schools that are there for teenagers. Well, when we think about LGBTQI plus people from migrant background, we have to also keep in mind that we are talking about people who are children, who are teenagers, who are adults, who are families, who are older people. Everyone is part of it. So the first document, as I was saying, is mainly targeting frontline services here, not really cities. I mean, cities can use them too in administration, but it's really for frontline services. It's meant for people in urban services who have some managerial power. It focuses on the first steps to making a space feel safer, having a team that feels safe at work, and on what can be done structurally to create a safer space. Then we have the user manual for frontline workers, also for frontline services. It focuses on interactions, behaviors, language use. And when I'm saying language, I don't mean specifically your language, but in general. We know that in Europe, our languages are deep with colonial references, are full of issues when it comes to talking about the LGBTQI plus community, but also there are all of these little things that we need to learn on how to address people properly, and it is of course a very important part of making a space safe. Then we have the training manual that could be used by cities or by frontline services, and it's meant for trainers with experience on LGBTQI plus issues and on sexual and gender-based violence. But it could be used also directly by frontline workers who don't have access to the training in complement to the toolbox. It might be good also even for people who have never heard about anything related to LGBTQI+, migrant background, and so on, to just also, or safer spaces, to get an idea and maybe to better find out what to Google if they need to go deeper in their research. So this is the content of the training. There are 4 modules. The first one focuses on LGBTQI plus social norms and prejudice, explaining what is sex, what gender identity and gender expression is, what is sexual orientation as well, then talking about social norms and prejudice, and then adding a couple of tips from the toolbox. Then we have the module 2 on migration and social norms and intersectionality. There is a full module on what is intersectionality. We realize that intersectionality is as much or a bigger buzzword than our friend the safe space, and it's actually a word that's used a lot in institutions, but we also realize that a lot of people don't really understand how it works and where it comes from. So this is the focus of the last bit of this. And so we are actually wondering who is the migrant community? What is a migrant? What is the definition of a migrant? Who is perceived as being a migrant? And then the obstacles and prejudice that goes with it, and it goes from xenophobia to racism. It will detail also the difference between race, ethnicity, and religion, and so on and so forth. Then we have the module 3, that is on safer spaces. What are safer spaces? Why are safer spaces important for urban services? And how do we set up safer spaces? The key principles I just showed you. And then it will focus on setting up safer spaces. Then the last module is on maintaining the safer space. So first and foremost, the point of attention, focusing on what you can control rather than on what you cannot control. For example, the attitude of the person who comes in, you cannot control. Your own attitude, you can control, that's yours. Then talking about microaggressions and how to react to microaggressions. Then we have a full exercise on how to react to microaggressions, and also how to react when you are called out for having said something that's aggressive to someone, or that's offensive to someone, or that's violent towards someone. And then we have the awareness raising material. There are 4 main objectives behind the awareness raising part of this toolbox. The first one is raising awareness among frontline workers on the fact that certain interactions can make spaces unsafe and therefore inaccessible, which is not necessarily an evidence for everyone, you know. The second one is showing frontline workers that solutions exist and that they are accessible. The third one is raising awareness among LGBTQI+ people from a migrant background on the fact that safety issues are identified and that steps are being taken to solve them. This is going back to our fake promises and the issue of trust also, when people tell you this is a safe space. Well, if you're part of a group that requires safer spaces, at some point we need to see things happening. You need to be able to actually know that the work is being done. And the fourth objective is allowing urban services to show their public that they are aware of the problem and are working on solving it. The first piece of the material is videos. There are actually 3 videos. The objectives that they target is the raising awareness amongst frontline workers on the fact that certain interactions can make spaces unsafe, the showing frontline workers that solutions exist and that they are accessible, raising awareness among LGBTQI+ people from a migrant background on the fact that safety issues are identified and that steps are being taken. So at the moment we have 3 videos. Oops, I'm going to go back a little bit. So now, in the future, when you're actually seeing this is a very weird situation. I'm sorry, but in the future, in August, the 3 videos should be out. The first video is about what is a safe space, right? What is a safe space, and the fact that the toolbox exists to actually help organizations making their spaces safer. The second video is what we call within the group video B. It's focusing on binaries, and it's showing an example of unsafe situations and solutions, potential solutions for example, non-binary people in frontline services. And the third one is about forced coming out in LGBTQI+ organizations. I'm going to show you those videos. Keep in mind that they are the first draft of them. By August, they should be completely finished. They are actually animated and everything. And you'll be able to see them, I think, on the IOM booth in Copenhagen. I'll confirm this during the Q&A that will actually take place in the present. It's the weirdest situation ever. Okay. Let's see if this works, because technology has to be with us on this one. The first video, or the second one, is actually binaries.
Some people are men, and some people are women. And some people are somewhere in between, a mix of both, or outside and beyond the binary altogether. We often call these people non-binary. These trans folks who find themselves thriving outside and beyond the gender binary can look like this, or like this, or even like this. Joe is a non-binary person, and they are absolutely dreading the thought of going to their doctor's appointment today. This is Lily. Lily's priority is to make patients feel safe, seen, and welcome.
Lily can see that Joe is uncomfortable, but doesn't know what to say or how to help. LGBTQI plus people from migrant backgrounds are much more likely to seek help and trust professionals when they feel like all aspects of their identity are accepted and welcome.
Unfortunately, even with the best intentions, we can make people feel unsafe, and it is more than crucial to be properly informed when it comes to supporting transgender and non-binary people.
Introducing the Equal City LGBTQI plus toolbox for frontline workers.
It's designed to help in situations just like this. It provides you with practical tips to help you ensure that everyone feels seen, heard, respected, safe. Learn more about Equal City Toolbox at www.wecareaboutyou.com.
Of course, the email, the address is belgium.iom.int/equalcity. You will see yourself. And then the video number 3 is on forthcoming out on in LGBTQI plus settings.
Meet Amir. Amir is excited to enter a new queer space that just opened in his city. But because of the stereotypes surrounding his community, Amir faces some extra challenges. Amir's right to belong in a queer space is often questioned, and it just doesn't feel like this space is meant for him. He shouldn't have to come out as gay to feel welcome.
LGBTQI plus people from migrant backgrounds are much more likely to seek help and trust professionals when they feel like all aspects of their identity are accepted and welcome.
Unfortunately, even with the best intentions, we can make people feel unsafe.
Introducing the Equal City LGBTQI plus toolbox for frontline workers.
It's designed to help in situations just like this. It provides you with practical tips to help you ensure that everyone feels seen, heard, respected, safe. Learn more about Equal City Toolbox at www.wecareaboutyou.com.
So how can you use the videos? If you are a city official, you can raise awareness among frontline workers on the necessity of safer spaces. It can work as an introduction to the toolbox, and it's you could use it during events or online. And for everyone else, we can use it as pedagogical material to understand what safer spaces are and the issues that unsafe spaces can cause. They are actually in the training. And it can also be used in awareness raising sequences. It could also be used as an introduction to an introspective discussion on one's organization practices. For example, a team building, we're like, okay, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? And maybe having this as material to start a conversation. And then the second part of the awareness raising material are posters and flyers. The objectives are raising awareness amongst LGBTQI plus people from a migrant background on the fact that safety issues are identified and that steps are actually being taken to solve them, and allowing urban services to show their public that they are aware of the problem and working on solving it. So this is the poster, and to use a poster, actually, the idea is to fill it in. As you see here, there are little dots that can be filled in with a pen. And the idea is to showcase and to put it in waiting spaces, in bathrooms, on doors, in the kitchen, wherever, where you actually have public coming in and saying, actually, what have you done? How many steps have you taken to make your workplace safer? What portion of the staff has been trained on safer spaces? Which measures have been implemented to make our services safer for LGBTQI+ people with migrant background? And this is the back of what is also the flyer. So the flyer doesn't have the logos here, but there's also a QR code in there. So if people are curious, they can just scan it and get on the website right away. As you'll notice, there are no rainbows in there, because it's also important to keep in mind that sometimes rainbows can be exclusive. Yes, they could be exclusive. Basically, rainbows may out people. So some people may not want to pick up a flyer with a rainbow on it if it talks about LGBTQI plus issues, because they may be afraid of being outed by that simple gesture. So that's always a good thing to keep in mind. So as a conclusion, first thing first, so the toolbox will be available on the IOM website in November 2021. It will be available in various languages. It will be there in French, in Dutch, I think also in Italian and Portuguese. We are working on translation right now. There will be a live Q&A in a moment, I think, so maybe we can discuss this, and it will be then in the present. Again, I'm a bit lost with all of this time travel we are doing right now, and I will confirm this in the Q&A, but I should be in Copenhagen also and available at the IOM booth. If you want to meet and discuss in person, I should be around, as many people will be. Oh, and also remember, as a final conclusion, the efficiency of tools depends on how they are used. So you can have a beautiful hammer, but if you don't actually use it, your nail is not going to get into the wall. Voila. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope we'll get to talk in the Q&A right now. Thank you.